Imagine a crime so gruesome, so unfathomable, that it leaves an entire community shaken to its core. A man, a seemingly ordinary individual, commits an act of violence so heinous it borders on the unimaginable. His name is Jason Thornburg, and his story isn't just about murder. It's about betrayal, horror, and the dark truths that can hide in plain sight. In this video, we'll explore the chilling tale of Thornburg, now infamous as the heart-eating killer, who recently received the ultimate punishment, the death penalty. What drove him to commit such a horrifying act? Was there something in his past that hinted at the monster lurking beneath? And how has this crime devastated not just the victims' families, but Thornburg's own loved ones? This case has captured national attention, with headlines screaming the unthinkable and media outlets racing to piece together the puzzle of Thornburg's life. But behind the sensational stories are real people, families left shattered, friends struggling to comprehend the incomprehensible, and a community forever scarred. Stay with us as we delve into this gripping and tragic case, uncovering details that will leave you questioning how such evil could exist and how justice is ultimately served. The full story is more shocking than you could ever imagine, and it's one you won't want to miss. In September 2021, police officers in Fort Worth, Texas, responded to an anonymous tip that would lead them to one of the most horrifying discoveries in the city's history. A body, dismembered and charred, was found stuffed inside a burning dumpster. The victim was later identified as Lauren Phillips, a 34-year-old woman who had been reported missing by her family. However, what initially appeared to be a gruesome murder quickly turned into a nightmare of incomprehensible brutality as investigators unraveled the truth behind her death. Lauren Phillips had not just been killed, she had been mutilated in ways that defied human understanding. Her heart had been cut from her body, and later Jason Thornburg, the man responsible for the crime, would confess to something even more horrifying. He had consumed her heart as part of what he described as a ritual sacrifice. Thornburg claimed he was purifying Lauren's soul and fulfilling what he believed to be a divine mission. He showed no remorse as he calmly recounted these chilling details to detectives, leaving even the most hardened investigators visibly shaken. The brutality did not stop with Lauren. Thornburg later confessed to the murders of at least two others: Mark Jewell, a 61-year-old man who had been his roommate, and Mary Jane Simmons, a 42-year-old woman he described as a friend. Both were killed in a similar manner, their bodies dismembered and burned. Thornburg admitted that he had methodically planned each murder, claiming they were part of a spiritual calling. He revealed in graphic detail how he would sit with his victims, speaking to them about his beliefs, before attacking them when they least expected it. His methods were both cruel and calculated. For Lauren, Thornburg admitted he had lured her to his home under the guise of needing help with something mundane. Once there, he overpowered her, tied her up, and began what he referred to as his sacrificial process. He slit her throat, watching as she bled out, and then proceeded to mutilate her body with a disturbing precision. Thornburg later described how he removed her heart and consumed it, claiming it was an offering to God. The callousness with which he recounted these events, devoid of any emotion, left investigators stunned. Similarly, Mark Jewell had trusted Thornburg as a roommate and friend. Thornburg admitted he had killed Mark in his sleep, slicing his throat before dismembering him. He described how he had methodically cleaned the scene and burned Mark's remains to destroy evidence. Mary Jane Simmons, a woman Thornburg had known for years, suffered a similar fate. Thornburg lured her to his home, speaking to her about his so-called divine mission before killing her in an almost ritualistic manner. Thornburg's twisted ideology appeared to be rooted in a warped interpretation of religious texts and apocalyptic beliefs. He told investigators that he believed he was chosen by God to carry out these killings as a form of spiritual purification. His confessions painted the picture of a man fully convinced of his righteousness, even as he described acts of unimaginable cruelty. He showed no hesitation, no regret, only a disturbing calmness as he detailed each murder. What made the case even more horrifying was Thornburg's ability to appear ordinary to those around him. His neighbors described him as quiet, polite, and unremarkable. Yet behind closed doors, he was capable of unfathomable brutality. Thornburg admitted that he had been planning these murders for years, carefully selecting his victims and timing his actions. Each crime was premeditated, each step executed with cold precision. When Thornburg's actions finally came to light, the public reaction was immediate and intense. The media quickly dubbed him the heart-eating killer, and his name became synonymous with horror. As the details of his crimes were revealed, headlines around the world captured the sheer depravity of his acts. News outlets shared haunting footage of Thornburg being escorted to court, his expression blank. As reporters shouted questions he refused to answer. Friends and family of the victims were left shattered. Lauren Phillips' mother described her daughter as a kind and trusting woman who had been lured into a deadly trap. In a tearful statement, she said, "She didn't deserve this. No one deserves this. The way he took her from us. There are no words for that kind of evil." Mark Jewell's sister expressed disbelief, saying, "We trusted him. He was supposed to be a friend, someone we thought was kind. How could someone do this to another human being?" The grief was palpable, the loss unimaginable. Thornburg's trial was one of the most closely watched in recent Texas history. The courtroom was packed with family members, reporters, and curious onlookers. As the prosecution laid out the evidence, including Thornburg's chilling confessions, the jury sat in stunned silence. The defense attempted to argue that Thornburg's actions were the result of mental illness, but the sheer brutality and premeditation of his crimes left little room for doubt. The prosecution portrayed him as a calculated predator, fully aware of his actions and their consequences. When the jury returned a verdict of guilty and recommended the death penalty, there was a sense of both relief and sorrow in the courtroom. Lauren Phillips' mother clutched a photograph of her daughter, whispering through tears, "Justice." Thornburg showed no visible reaction as the sentence was read, his expression as cold and unfeeling as it had been throughout the trial. For many, the death sentence was the only appropriate punishment for crimes so heinous. Yet the scars left by Thornburg's actions would never fully heal. His name would forever be associated with unimaginable cruelty, a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk within seemingly ordinary individuals. The investigation into Lauren Phillips' murder began with a single grim discovery, a dumpster fire that revealed the dismembered remains of her body. The local fire department had initially responded to what seemed like a routine blaze, but as they extinguished the flames, the horror of what lay inside came to light. Detectives were immediately called to the scene, and the first question was clear: who could commit such an act of cruelty? The state of the body told investigators that this was no ordinary murder. Lauren had been violently attacked, her throat slit with precision, and her body mutilated in a way that suggested an almost ritualistic purpose. The medical examiner's report revealed chilling details. Her heart had been removed post-mortem, an act that was both deliberate and grotesque. It was clear the killer wanted to send a message, or perhaps fulfill a personal compulsion. Detectives began canvassing the area, questioning neighbors and examining surveillance footage from nearby businesses and homes. It wasn't long before a potential lead emerged. Video footage captured a man, later identified as Jason Thornburg, carrying large bags and disposing of them in the dumpster where Lauren's remains were found. Thornburg had been a known acquaintance of Lauren, and further digging revealed that he had a history of erratic behavior and a penchant for discussing bizarre religious ideologies. Police visited Thornburg's residence, a modest apartment in Fort Worth. What they found there was nothing short of a house of horrors. Bloodstains on the walls and floors pointed to a gruesome struggle, and the smell of burnt flesh lingered in the air. Forensic analysis confirmed that Lauren Phillips had been killed in that very apartment. Thornburg was brought in for questioning, and what followed was one of the most chilling confessions investigators had ever heard. Thornburg admitted not only to Lauren's murder, but also to 2 additional killings. He described in graphic detail how he had lured his victims to his home, gained their trust, and then attacked them in cold blood. He explained his so-called rituals, saying that each murder was an offering to purify the souls of his victims and please a higher power. The detectives listened in disbelief as Thornburg calmly detailed how he had slit Lauren's throat, drained her blood, removed her heart, and consumed it as part of this twisted ritual. The confession was both horrifying and crucial. Thornburg's ability to recall each step with such clarity left no doubt about his guilt, but it also raised chilling questions about how he had managed to evade capture until now. Investigators began to suspect that the murders of Lauren Phillips, Mark Jewell, and Mary Jane Simmons might be part of a larger pattern, and they launched an exhaustive search for evidence that could link Thornburg to other unsolved cases. The brutality of Thornburg's actions, combined with his chilling calmness during the confession, left even the most seasoned officers shaken. One detective later described the experience. "I've seen some horrible things in my career, but this was something else. The lack of remorse, the way he talked about it like it was just another day. I've never seen anything like it." As investigators delved deeper into Thornburg's life, they began to uncover a disturbing pattern. Lauren Phillips was not his first victim, and likely not his last had he not been caught. Thornburg's confessions revealed that he had been planning and carrying out murders for months, each one more calculated and ritualistic than the last. His first known victim was Mark Jewell, a 61-year-old man who had been living with Thornburg as a roommate. Mark was described by friends and family as a kind and trusting man who enjoyed helping others. Thornburg later admitted that he had killed Mark in his sleep, cutting his throat before dismembering his body. He disposed of Mark's remains in a similar manner, burning them to destroy evidence. Thornburg explained to investigators that he saw Mark's death as the beginning of his divine mission, claiming it was the first step in what he believed to be a calling from God. Mary Jane Simmons, a 42-year-old friend of Thornburg, was his next victim. Thornburg confessed to luring her to his apartment under the guise of needing help. Once she arrived, he offered her food and drinks, creating a false sense of security before striking. He attacked Mary Jane when her guard was down, cutting her throat and proceeding with his gruesome rituals. Thornburg described how he methodically dismembered her body and disposed of the remains in different locations, ensuring they would be difficult to trace back to him. The methodical nature of Thornburg's crimes and his ability to manipulate those around him made him a particularly dangerous predator. Investigators noted that each murder followed a similar pattern. He targeted individuals who trusted him, invited them into his home, and then killed them in a controlled and ritualistic manner. The precision of his actions suggested that he had been planning these murders for a long time, refining his methods with each killing. As detectives pieced together the timeline of his crimes, they discovered that Thornburg had been living a double life. To those who knew him casually, he appeared to be a quiet, unassuming man. Neighbors described him as polite, if a bit withdrawn, and no one suspected the horrors taking place behind closed doors. But to his victims, Thornburg was a manipulative and calculated killer who preyed on their trust. The chilling realization that Thornburg could have continued killing if he hadn't been caught sent shockwaves through the community. Detectives began looking into unsolved murders and missing persons cases in the area, trying to determine if Thornburg's reign of terror extended even further. His calm demeanor during his confession and his insistence that he was chosen to carry out these acts left many wondering just how many lives he had taken in the name of his twisted beliefs. The public was horrified as these details emerged, and the media coverage intensified. The narrative of Jason Thornburg as a cold-blooded killer consumed by delusions of divine purpose captivated the nation. But behind the headlines and the gruesome details were families mourning their loved ones, struggling to make sense of an evil so profound it defied comprehension. The courtroom was packed with people eager to witness the trial of Jason Thornburg, the man whose heinous acts had shocked the nation. Reporters filled the gallery, their pens poised to capture every chilling detail, while family members of the victims sat clutching photographs of their loved ones, their faces etched with grief and anger. Thornburg, however, appeared emotionless as he was led into the courtroom. His blank stare unnerved those in attendance, a stark contrast to the horrifying brutality of his crimes. The prosecution wasted no time in painting a vivid and harrowing picture of Thornburg's actions. They laid out the evidence in painstaking detail, starting with the gruesome discovery of Lauren Phillips' remains. Photos of the crime scene were shown to the jury, eliciting audible gasps from the audience. The prosecution described how Thornburg had lured Lauren to his home, tied her up, and carried out his so-called ritual. They highlighted his methodical dismemberment of her body and his chilling confession that he consumed her heart as part of a twisted spiritual belief. Next, they moved to the murders of Mark Jewell and Mary Jane Simmons. The jury heard about how Thornburg had betrayed the trust of these individuals, using his knowledge of their vulnerabilities to carry out his premeditated killings. The prosecution presented surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and excerpts from Thornburg's confession, leaving no doubt about his guilt. Each piece of evidence felt like another blow to the grieving families in the room, who sat silently, their pain palpable. As the trial progressed, the defense attempted to argue that Thornburg's actions were the result of severe mental illness. They brought in psychological experts who testified that he suffered from delusions and believed he was carrying out divine commands. Thornburg's attorneys argued that his mental state rendered him incapable of fully understanding the consequences of his actions. However, the prosecution countered by emphasizing the meticulous planning and calculated nature of the murders. They argued that Thornburg's ability to evade capture for months and his cold, detailed confessions proved he was fully aware of what he was doing. The emotional toll on the victims' families was evident throughout the trial. Lauren Phillips' mother gave a tearful statement, describing her daughter as a loving and trusting person who had been stolen from the world in the most horrific way. Mark Jewell's sister spoke of her disbelief that someone they had trusted could turn into a monster. Their words brought the courtroom to tears and served as a stark reminder of the human cost of Thornburg's actions. Meanwhile, the media coverage surrounding the trial reached a fever pitch. News outlets from across the country covered every twist and turn, from the harrowing testimony to Thornburg's unnerving composure. Headlines labeled him the ritual killer and the heart-eating monster, turning his name into a symbol of unimaginable evil. True crime enthusiasts dissected every detail, while social media buzzed with outrage and shock. The trial became a grim spectacle, with public opinion overwhelmingly demanding the harshest punishment possible. But amid the media frenzy, a deeper narrative emerged, one of heartbreak and disbelief among those who had once known Thornburg. Friends and acquaintances came forward, many expressing shock and sorrow over what he had done. A former co-worker described him as quiet and polite, maybe a little strange but nothing alarming. A distant relative admitted they had noticed his increasing obsession with apocalyptic beliefs, but never thought it could lead to such violence. Thornburg's own family released a brief statement expressing their condolences to the victims' families and acknowledging their own devastation, saying, "We will never understand how Jason became capable of such evil." As the trial neared its conclusion, the tension in the courtroom was almost unbearable. The prosecution delivered a closing argument that left the jury and audience alike in stunned silence. They called Thornburg a calculated predator, who used religious beliefs as a shield for his own violent tendencies. They emphasized the pain and suffering he inflicted, not only on his victims but on their families and the community as a whole. When the jury left to deliberate, the weight of the case hung heavily over everyone in the room. Outside the courthouse, news cameras captured the faces of the victims' families as they awaited the verdict. When the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, followed by a recommendation for the death penalty, there was a collective exhale. For the victims' families, it was a moment of bittersweet justice. Justice that could never truly heal their wounds, but at least provided a sense of accountability. Inside the courtroom, Thornburg remained unmoved, his lack of emotion only adding to the eerie aura surrounding him. The media coverage didn't let up after the verdict. Analysts debated the implications of the case, while public reactions ranged from relief to outrage over the death penalty. Some questioned whether Thornburg's mental health issues should have spared him from the ultimate punishment, while others argued that his actions were so heinous that no other sentence would suffice. As the story spread, it became clear that Thornburg's crimes had left a lasting scar, not just on the victims' families, but on the entire community. His calm, calculated violence and lack of remorse made him a symbol of the worst humanity could offer. Yet amid the horror, the strength of the victims' families stood out. Their voices, their grief, and their fight for justice became a reminder of resilience in the face of unspeakable tragedy. The emotional weight in the courtroom reached its peak when the victims' families were given the chance to share their impact statements. Lauren Phillips' mother, visibly trembling as she approached the stand, held a framed photograph of her daughter. Her voice cracked as she began to speak, her grief spilling out with every word. "Lauren was the light of our lives," she said. "She was kind, trusting, and full of love. And that monster used her goodness against her. He didn't just take her life, he destroyed our family. We will never be whole again." The room was silent except for the occasional muffled sobs from those seated behind her. Mark Jewell's sister followed, her pain palpable, as she described how her brother had always been there for others. "Mark believed in giving people second chances, even when they didn't deserve it," she said. "Jason Thornburg used that against him. He betrayed Mark's kindness in the worst way imaginable." Mary Jane Simmons' family, too overwhelmed to speak, had their statement read by the prosecutor. It described Mary Jane as a vibrant and loving woman whose trust was shattered in her final moments. "She believed Jason was her friend," the statement read. "We can't begin to comprehend the fear and pain she must have felt in those final moments, and that thought will haunt us forever." As the family spoke, Jason Thornburg sat motionless, his expression eerily detached. He didn't flinch or react even as the words grew more impassioned. One family member, unable to hold back their anger, shouted, "Look at us. Look at what you've done." Thornburg remained still, his lack of remorse adding another layer of torment for those grieving. When it was Thornburg's turn to speak, the courtroom held its breath. Would he show any sign of humanity? Any regret? Instead, he calmly reiterated his belief that he had been fulfilling a divine mission. "I did what I was called to do," he said. His words hung in the air like a dark cloud, drawing audible gasps and cries from the gallery. For the families, his statement was the final insult, a cruel reminder of the evil that had taken their loved ones. The judge, visibly affected by the statements and Thornburg's demeanor, delivered the final sentence: death by lethal injection. His voice was firm but carried a weight that reflected the gravity of the case. "Your actions were heinous, calculated, and beyond comprehension," he said. "You have shown no remorse, no empathy, and no regard for human life. For that, this court sentences you to death." The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief, anger, and sorrow. Family members wept openly, clutching one another as they tried to process the moment. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the families for statements, but most declined, too overcome by the emotional toll of the trial. A few expressed their gratitude to the jury and the legal system for delivering justice, while others said no punishment could ever undo the pain Thornburg had caused. As the verdict and sentence made headlines, the public's reaction was swift and divided. Many supported the death penalty, arguing that Thornburg's crimes were so horrific that no other punishment was fitting. Social media platforms buzzed with discussions about justice and morality, with hashtags like "Justice for Lauren" trending. Others, however, raised questions about the ethical implications of the death penalty, particularly in cases involving mental health. The aftermath of the trial was a whirlwind of media coverage, interviews, and community reflection. Some news outlets focused on the victims, sharing their stories and celebrating their lives rather than giving Thornburg more attention. Others delved into the legal intricacies of the case, analyzing how the evidence and confessions had led to the death penalty. Thornburg's lack of remorse and his twisted beliefs became a focal point of public discourse, with many struggling to comprehend how someone could commit such acts and feel justified in doing so. As Thornburg was transferred to death row, the families of the victims faced the difficult task of moving forward. For Lauren Phillips' mother, the sentence brought a sense of closure, but not peace. "Justice was served, but it doesn't bring my daughter back," she said in a quiet interview. "We'll carry this pain for the rest of our lives." The community of Fort Worth also grappled with the aftermath of Thornburg's crimes. Vigils were held for the victims, with hundreds gathering to honor their memories and support their families. The case left a permanent scar on the city, a chilling reminder of the evil that can lurk behind a facade of normalcy. For Jason Thornburg, the death penalty marked the end of his reign of terror. But for the victims' families, it was only a small part of their journey. Their strength, resilience, and determination to seek justice became a testament to the power of love in the face of unimaginable darkness. As they walked out of the courthouse for the last time, they carried with them the memories of their loved ones, lives stolen but never forgotten. As Jason Thornburg was escorted to death row, the families of his victims began the long, arduous process of trying to rebuild their lives. The death sentence, while bringing a sense of justice, did little to alleviate the void left by their loved ones. The legal process wasn't over, as Thornburg's case would likely face appeals, a standard procedure in death penalty cases. Yet for those who had suffered the most, the sentence was a statement. Society had recognized the gravity of his crimes and acted decisively. Thornburg's transfer to death row brought with it a strict and isolated existence. Texas's death row inmates are confined to their cells for 22 to 24 hours a day, with minimal human interaction. For a man who had once manipulated those around him with ease, the silence and solitude of death row served as a stark contrast. Despite his isolation, Thornburg's name continued to circulate in the media as commentators debated the broader implications of his case. For law enforcement and legal experts, Thornburg's crimes raised difficult questions about how such a predator could operate unnoticed for so long. He had lived in the community, worked alongside others, and appeared relatively ordinary. Yet behind closed doors, he was capable of unfathomable cruelty. Detectives revisited cold cases, searching for any links to Thornburg. While no concrete evidence emerged to connect him to other crimes, the possibility lingered that his reign of terror may have extended beyond the known victims. For the victims' families, life after the trial became a delicate balance of mourning and remembrance. Lauren Phillips' mother dedicated herself to advocating for victims of violent crime, working to create resources for families grappling with loss. "I can't bring Lauren back," she said during a television interview, "but I can try to make sure no one else feels as alone as we did." Her voice became a rallying cry for those seeking justice and support. Mark Jewell's sister focused on preserving his memory, organizing community events in his honor. She worked to highlight the kindness and generosity that defined her brother's life, refusing to let his story be overshadowed by the man who took it. "Mark wasn't just a victim," she said. "He was a person who mattered, and that's how I want the world to remember him." Mary Jane Simmons' family, devastated by their loss, chose to grieve privately. They turned to one another for support, their family bonds growing stronger in the wake of tragedy. In a rare public statement, one family member said, "We're not ready to speak about Mary Jane yet, but we thank everyone who has reached out. We're focusing on healing." The case also left a lasting impact on the community of Fort Worth. The brutality of Thornburg's actions shattered the sense of safety many residents had once taken for granted. Neighborhoods where he had lived became sites of unease, as people grappled with the fact that someone so dangerous had been among them. Churches held vigils for the victims, and community leaders called for greater awareness of mental health and warning signs of dangerous behavior. Thornburg's story also became a case study in criminology courses and legal discussions. Professors and students analyzed the psychological and societal factors that may have contributed to his crimes, debating the role of mental health in criminal justice. While Thornburg's defense team had argued that his delusions drove him to kill, the prosecution's focus on the calculated nature of his actions highlighted the complexity of cases involving severe mental illness. For many, the most haunting aspect of Thornburg's case was his complete lack of remorse. Even as he awaited execution, he continued to maintain that his actions were justified by his religious beliefs. This unrepentant attitude made him a symbol of the darkest extremes of human behavior, a stark reminder of what can happen when delusion and violence intertwine. As the years passed, Thornburg's name began to fade from the headlines, but the memory of his crimes remained etched in the minds of those who had been affected. The victims' families carried their grief with them, turning their pain into action. They established scholarships, organized charity events, and worked to ensure their loved ones' lives were remembered for their joy, not the way they ended. For Lauren Phillips' mother, visiting her daughter's grave became a regular ritual. "I talk to her," she said in an interview. "I tell her I'm trying to live in a way that honors her. It's the only way I know how to keep going." Her resilience became an inspiration to others facing similar tragedies, showing that even in the face of unspeakable loss, healing was possible. Mark Jewell's sister created an annual fundraiser in his name, benefiting homeless shelters and mental health organizations. "Mark believed in helping others no matter their situation," she explained. "This is how I keep his spirit alive." The events became a cornerstone of the community, bringing people together to remember Mark's kindness and generosity. Mary Jane Simmons' family eventually opened up about their loss, speaking about her vibrant personality and the love she had for her children. "She was the glue that held us together," her brother said in a televised interview. "We miss her every day, but we keep her memory alive through the way we love each other." Jason Thornburg's execution, though years away, loomed as a final chapter in a story that had left so many lives broken. For some, the death penalty was a necessary consequence of his actions, a way to ensure he could never harm another person. For others, it was a somber reminder of the irreversible damage he had caused. Regardless of personal beliefs, one truth was universal. Thornburg's crimes had left an indelible mark, one that would echo for generations. In the end, the story of Jason Thornburg was not just about a man consumed by darkness. It was about the resilience of the human spirit, the strength of families in the face of unimaginable loss, and the power of communities to come together and heal. While Thornburg's actions revealed the depths of cruelty one person could reach, the response to his crimes highlighted the capacity for compassion, strength, and hope that defines humanity.